Have you ever looked into the glass eyes of a doll and felt, just for a moment, that it was looking back? That it was more than porcelain and paint, that something alive sat behind the glossy stare? Most people shake it off as imagination, a trick of the light, a childhood fear they grow out of. But what if it wasn't your imagination? What if those eyes really did belong to something that once lived, something that still waits in silence, waiting for someone foolish enough to notice? That was the question none of them wanted to ask when they first saw the old toy shop. The group had been wandering the quieter side of town for hours. Madison, the one who always suggested adventures, had read about an abandoned block of shops near the river. Once a thriving market street, it had been gutted by time, storms, and shifting economies. But unlike the broken laundromats and crumbling diners, one storefront still stood intact. Its paint, though faded, clung to the walls, its windows, though dusty, were unbroken, and its crooked wooden sign still swung gently in the breeze. Harlan's Toy Emporium. Inside, the dim glow of the setting sun filtered through streaked glass. And through that dusty veil, they saw them, rows upon rows of dolls. Some were slumped on shelves, others propped inside display cases. Their faces were strangely lifelike, painted with care, and their clothes looked old-fashioned, stitched by hand rather than machine. "What the hell?" murmured Eric, pressing his face against the glass. His breath fogged it, distorting the vision of dozens of small, motionless faces staring back. Why are they all kids? They weren't the porcelain-faced caricatures they'd expected. No exaggerated eyes, no cartoonish grins. These dolls looked like real children. Their features carried imperfections, freckles, crooked teeth, strands of hair that fell out of place as though caught in a breeze. A few even had faint scratches on their knees, like scabs frozen in time. Madison swallowed, trying to sound braver than she felt. That's actually pretty amazing craftsmanship. It's like art. No, it's creepy as hell, muttered Jordan, the skeptic of the group. He shifted uneasily, tugging at his jacket as if the chill wasn't from the autumn air but from inside those walls. The place should have been boarded up, but look, it's clean. No graffiti, no broken glass. It's like someone still takes care of it. Sophie, the quietest among them, said nothing. She only tilted her head, her eyes locked on one particular doll near the window, a little girl with chestnut braids, her hands clasped neatly in her lap. Sophie's heart thudded because the face, the delicate slope of the nose, the faint cleft in the chin, it looked almost like someone she remembered. Almost like her cousin, who had gone missing 5 years ago. The others were already debating whether to go in, but Sophie didn't hear them. Her gaze was trapped by that doll's frozen expression, lips parted as if she were about to whisper something through the glass. The door creaked when Madison finally pushed it open, startling them all. The bell above the frame gave no cheerful jingle, it let out a hollow, metallic chime that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. The air inside was colder than the street. It smelled faintly of varnish and dust, with something sharper underneath, something like iron. The floorboards creaked beneath their sneakers as they stepped into the strange stillness. No cobwebs. No overturned furniture. No signs of vandalism. The place had been preserved as if the shopkeeper had just stepped out and would be back any moment. Why hasn't anyone demolished this block? Eric asked in a low voice, running his hand along the counter. His fingers came away with dust, but beneath it, the wood shone as if freshly polished. It's like the city forgot it exists. Maybe it's condemned, Jordan muttered. Or cursed. I vote we leave before. Look at this one. Madison interrupted, pointing toward a doll seated in a glass case by the register. The group clustered around. Inside sat a boy of maybe 9 or 10, frozen mid-laugh, dimples etched so delicately they almost seemed to deepen as the candlelight caught them. His hands were carved in mid-motion, one reaching upward as though asking to be taken. He looks real, Sophie whispered. Too real, Jordan snapped. He glanced at Madison. Seriously, this isn't funny anymore. I'm not standing around in some abandoned freak show. We should. The bell above the door rang again. But none of them had touched it. They spun around. The door was shut. Probably the wind, Eric said quickly, though his voice betrayed the tremor in his chest. It's old. Drafts, you know? But Sophie wasn't listening. Her eyes had locked again on the doll with the chestnut braids. The closer she stood, the more she realized the resemblance wasn't almost. It was exact. The tiny scar above the right eyebrow. The chipped front tooth. The same details she'd cried over when her cousin's photo was plastered across news broadcasts. Her breath caught. Her knees nearly gave. It wasn't just craftsmanship. It was an art. It was her cousin. And as Sophie stared in horror, she could swear, just for an instant, that the doll's glossy eyes blinked. Sophie's breath froze in her chest. The shop, with its creaking silence and suffocating air, seemed to collapse around her in that one impossible second. She had been staring at the doll with the chestnut braids, remembering her cousin's face through blurred childhood summers, ice cream dripping down her chin, giggles while running through sprinklers, the way she always tilted her head when she was caught in a lie. All those fragments came rushing back at once, converging on this single figure behind glass. The doll had not only looked like her cousin. It was her cousin. Sophie knew it down to the smallest detail. And just when she thought her memory was betraying her, just when she told herself she was only imagining things in the gloom, the doll's glassy eyelids had flickered, like a faint but undeniable blink. Her hand flew to her mouth. She wanted to scream, to yank the others and point and shout that this was proof, this was real, but the sound caught in her throat. It was as if the room itself had swallowed her voice before it could leave her lips. "What's wrong?" Madison asked, her tone sharp with sudden alarm. Sophie didn't answer. She took a step backward, pointing with a trembling finger toward the glass case. Her voice cracked. It moved. Jordan groaned loudly, rolling his eyes as though he could drag them away from the rising tension. "Oh, come on. We're really doing this? We're really going to start jumping at shadows now? It's a doll, Sophie. A doll. They don't move." But Eric didn't laugh. He leaned closer to the display, squinting at the little girl in braids. His reflection warped across the glass, but beneath it, the doll's expression seemed different. It was still frozen, still seated with her hands neatly folded, but something about the curve of her lips had shifted. Hadn't her mouth been closed before? Was it parted now, just slightly, as though she was trying to form words? Madison shivered. "This place is too weird. I don't like it. We never should have come in here," Jordan muttered again, more quietly this time, as though the shop itself might overhear. He glanced toward the door, but it seemed farther away now, swallowed by shadows. Then came the sound. A faint scuttling, like small footsteps pattering across wooden boards. The group froze, their ears straining. It wasn't the groan of the old building or the sigh of wind through cracks, it was deliberate, sharp, and rapid. Little feet moving where no one should be moving. "Did you hear that?" Madison whispered. Eric nodded, his face pale. "Yeah. Upstairs." They all looked up at once. Above them, the ceiling stretched into darkness, a second floor that hadn't seemed noticeable when they first entered. A crooked staircase leaned against the wall to their right, its banister dusted and gray. The steps groaned under the weight of silence, as though they were aching for something, or someone, to tread them again. "I'm not going up there," Jordan said firmly, crossing his arms. But even as he spoke, his eyes darted nervously toward the staircase, betraying the unease gnawing at him. "Maybe it's rats," Madison offered, though the suggestion sounded weak, forced. Her voice quivered. "Old buildings always have rats." Sophie finally found her voice, though it trembled like glass about to shatter. "That's not rats. Rats don't blink. Rats don't look exactly like, she choked on the words. "Like my cousin." The group fell silent. Her confession hung in the stale air, heavy and unshakable. "Wait," Madison said slowly, turning toward Sophie. "What do you mean? You think—" "I know," Sophie cut her off, her voice sharp with rising panic. "It's her. It's her face, her scar, her teeth, it's her. Don't you understand? She went missing 5 years ago. And now she's here. As a doll. Madison's mouth fell open, but before she could respond, the scuttling sound returned, louder this time. The unmistakable patter of small feet racing across the floor above them. And then, silence. The kind of silence that presses against the ears until it almost roars. "All right, no," Jordan muttered, his voice cracking despite his attempt at defiance. He rubbed his hands over his face. "I'm not doing this. I'm leaving." He turned toward the door. But the door didn't move. The knob rattled in his grip, but the door refused to budge. He shoved harder, his shoulders slamming into the wood, but it was like pushing against stone. The bell above it gave a hollow chime with every shake, mocking him with its metallic ring. "Locked?" Eric whispered. "No," Jordan snarled, yanking harder, his knuckles white around the knob. "It's jammed. Or, it won't open." He gave one final violent tug before stumbling back, his chest heaving. His eyes darted toward the group, wild and disbelieving. "We're trapped." Sophie's knees threatened to buckle. She pressed her back against the glass case, trying not to look at the doll's face, at the way its eyes seemed almost aware of her. Then, from upstairs, a new sound trickled down through the ceiling, soft, high-pitched, and unmistakable. A child's laugh. It was faint, almost musical, and it carried through the boards like an echo from another world. The group's eyes snapped to one another. None of them dared breathe. And then, just as suddenly, the laugh stopped. But in that same instant, every doll in the shop seemed to shift. Heads angled slightly, hands moved just a fraction, as though reacting to the sound. Eric's stomach dropped. He stumbled backward, whispering the only words that came to him. "They're listening." For a moment, none of them moved. The laugh that had drifted from upstairs lingered in the air like a phantom, replaying in their minds even after it had gone. It wasn't just a sound, they all felt it in their bones, like the echo of a memory that didn't belong to them. A child's laugh should have been innocent, light-hearted, the very essence of joy. But this one seemed to carry something else. It was warped, distorted by distance and time, as though whatever child it came from had forgotten what laughter truly meant. The dolls had shifted. They had listened. Each of them, in their rigid poses, had turned ever so slightly toward the ceiling, like an audience responding to a cue. Sophie's skin crawled as her eyes darted from face to face, half convinced she would catch one of them still in motion. Their glass eyes glistened in the gloom, wide and attentive. "I told you," Sophie whispered, her voice shaking. "They're alive. They're not dolls, they're children." Jordan snapped, louder than he intended, his panic bleeding into anger. "Shut up. Just, shut up, all right? You're freaking everybody out." His voice cracked, betraying the terror in his chest. Madison wrapped her arms around herself, her voice tight. "Then explain what we just heard. Explain why the door won't open." Jordan didn't answer. He stared at the locked door like a drowning man watching the tide swallow the last stretch of sand. The silence stretched on too long. And then Eric, pale but determined, broke it. "We need to know what's up there." The group turned to him in disbelief. "You can't be serious," Madison whispered. "Look, I don't want to go," Eric admitted, his hand trembling as he rubbed the back of his neck. "But whatever's happening here, it's not going to let us out until it's finished with us." "You felt it too." The laugh, the way the dolls moved. "There's something upstairs, and it's controlling this place. If we don't face it, we're stuck." No one wanted to admit he was right, but the truth settled in their stomachs like stones. Finally, Madison exhaled shakily and nodded. "Fine. But we stick together. No wandering off. Not for a second." The staircase loomed in the shadows, every step coated in a layer of dust so thick it looked like no one had touched it in decades. Yet, faintly pressed into the grime, were footprints. Small ones. Bare. They trailed upward into the dark, stopping where the candlelight couldn't reach. Each creak of the stairs felt like a scream as they ascended, the boards protesting their weight. The air grew heavier with every step, thick with the smell of varnish and something far less pleasant, an undercurrent of rot that seeped from behind the walls. Halfway up, Sophie's hand brushed the banister. It was sticky. She pulled away quickly, heart hammering, and saw the faint smear of dark red across her palm. Blood. Old, dried, but unmistakable. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. The words would have shattered her already fragile courage. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with closed doors on either side. Wallpaper peeled in strips, curling like dead leaves, and the floor dipped slightly under their weight. The air here was colder, unnaturally so. Their breath came in pale wisps, though no draft stirred. The laugh came again. This time, closer. It drifted from the far end of the hall, where a door stood slightly ajar. A soft, golden glow pulsed from within, like candlelight. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Their feet carried them forward in unison, drawn as though by invisible strings. Each step was an act of defiance against the primal urge screaming at them to run back down the stairs and break the door until it gave way. When they reached the door, Madison reached out first, her hand trembling so violently she nearly dropped it back. But the thought of standing in that hallway, with all the unseen things pressing in from the dark, was somehow worse. She pushed the door open. The room beyond stole their breath. It wasn't abandoned. It was immaculate. Candles flickered on every surface, their flames steady, unbothered by the draftless air. The scent of melted wax and lavender oil filled the room, masking the rot that clung to the rest of the building. Along the walls stood more dolls, dozens of them, lined neatly on shelves like trophies. Each one had a child's face, different ages, different features, but all so lifelike that their eyes seemed to follow as the group stepped inside. At the center of the room sat a workbench. Tools were laid out in meticulous order: needles, carving knives, brushes, jars of pigment, and spools of thread. And on the bench, under the glow of a solitary candle, lay the unfinished body of another doll. Its limbs were half-stitched, its face half-painted. One glass eye stared up at them, the other socket empty. "Oh, God," Madison whispered, covering her mouth. Sophie stepped closer, her heart pounding in her ears. The features of the unfinished doll were already clear: soft cheeks, delicate nose, a faint cleft in the chin. She staggered back, bile rising in her throat. That's Jonah. From school. He went missing last year." Eric swore under his breath. And then, before any of them could move, a soft shuffle stirred behind them. The door creaked. Slowly, painfully slowly, it swung shut on its own. The latch clicked into place, sealing them inside. In the silence that followed, another sound slipped through, a faint, ragged breath. Not from any of them. From the shadows beyond the workbench. The sound of breathing in the shadows was faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind, but it grew steadily, becoming heavier, more deliberate. Every muscle in the group tensed as if the air itself had thickened. No one dared speak. No one dared move. The workbench, the half-finished doll, the meticulously arranged tools, all of it became secondary to the presence hiding just beyond the flickering candlelight. Sophie's hand trembled violently as she clutched Madison's arm. It's there," she whispered, barely audible. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, weak and brittle against the oppressive stillness of the room. Eric took a tentative step forward, his eyes scanning the dark corners. "Who's there? Show yourself." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence, a desperate, pleading sound that only made the darkness feel more alive. A slow shuffle responded, and then the shadow shifted. The candlelight caught just enough to reveal a figure crouched low on the floor, hands hidden, face obscured by a hood. But even in silhouette, there was something unnerving about its posture, like it was waiting, watching, sizing them up, not out of fear but calculation. "Step back," Jordan hissed, voice low and shaking. He pressed himself against the wall, as if it could protect him from whatever waited in that corner. "We don't know what this is." Sophie's gaze returned to the unfinished doll on the workbench. Its one painted eye seemed to glimmer in the candlelight. But it was more than that. The details of the doll's face, the curve of the lips, the slope of the nose, the delicate chin, felt alive, almost as if the doll was aware of the figure crouched in the corner, almost as if it was waiting for a command. The shadow shifted again, stepping slightly forward. A pair of eyes gleamed from the hood, too bright, too calculated to belong to a normal person. Sophie's stomach twisted violently. Those eyes were too sharp, too intelligent, and something deep inside her screamed recognition. "You," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. You're the one who made them. You're the doll maker." The figure didn't respond immediately. It tilted its head, the hood falling back slightly to reveal a pale, gaunt face, almost skeletal, with lines etched so deeply into the skin that Sophie could see every sinew, every shadow of a lifetime spent in obsession. Its eyes, however, were the most horrifying. Dark, glossy, and unblinking, they seemed to contain hundreds of faces within them, children's faces, frozen in terror, screaming silently behind the surface. "Yes," the dollmaker said finally, voice low and deliberate. It was not loud, but somehow every word vibrated through the room, settling in their bones. "I made them. Every one of them. Every child that vanished from this town, every innocent life you thought lost, resides here now." Madison stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. That's impossible. You killed them?" The dollmaker smiled, a slow, deliberate curve that didn't touch its eyes. "Killed? No. Preserved. Immortalized. Their bodies may be gone from the world you know, but their essence is eternal. It feeds me, and it feeds this place." Eric shook his head, disbelief warring with terror. What do you mean feeds you?" The dollmaker leaned forward, and the candlelight caught the faint shimmer of its long, slender fingers. "Every life has a story, yes? Each laugh, each cry, each secret thought. I capture it, preserve it, and transform it into something that lasts beyond the fragile shell of flesh. These dolls, these children, carry their memories, their fears, their souls, in every stitch, every brushstroke. And they listen. They are mine." Sophie felt bile rise in her throat. "And, my cousin? She's one of them?" The dollmaker's eyes narrowed slightly, a tilt of acknowledgement that made the hair on the back of Sophie's neck stand on end. "Yes. And she waits, like all the others, for someone who remembers her. Someone who sees her and speaks her name. That is the only way she moves, even for a moment. That is how she survives here, in this half-life of porcelain and pigment." Jordan backed up against the wall, panic rising like a wave that threatened to drown him. "We need to leave. Now. Get out of this place. You can't keep us here." The dollmaker chuckled softly, a sound like the scraping of wood across metal. "Leave? Why would you leave? You're part of the story now, too. Every choice you make, every step you take within the shop, every breath you draw, it strengthens me. You wanted adventure, curiosity, here it is. Do you regret it?" Madison's voice trembled as she shook her head. We didn't know. We thought it was abandoned. We didn't mean." "You thought wrong," the dollmaker interrupted. "Ignorance is not innocence. You entered my domain, and now you belong to it. The dolls are patient. They wait. They listen. They will test you. And it leaned closer, the shadows swallowing the rest of its form. "I never tire of watching." Sophie felt her hands shake violently, her mind spinning. Every doll in the room seemed to lean slightly toward them, tilting heads, following movements with those impossibly bright, glassy eyes. They weren't inanimate. They were aware. And somewhere deep in her chest, Sophie understood that leaving was not merely impossible, it was irrelevant. The dollmaker straightened suddenly and pointed toward the far end of the room. "There is one who remembers you most. Seek her, and you may find the key to your survival. Fail, and you will join them forever. The group's collective gaze followed the direction of the finger. On the far shelf, under the dim flicker of candlelight, was a doll, a girl, small, delicate, with chestnut braids. The same one Sophie had first noticed at the window. Her heart hammered. That was her cousin. Alive in a way she had never imagined, trapped in a form both fragile and eternal. And yet, there was something else. The doll's eyes glimmered differently now, almost as if they recognized Sophie, almost as if they pleaded. The dollmaker's voice broke through the silence once more. Time is short. Choose wisely. The children are patient, but I am eternal. And then the room fell into complete silence, punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic creak of the floorboards, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what they would do next. The group stood frozen for a long, agonizing moment, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in Sophie's ears. The dollmaker's words had settled over them like a weight of stone. The room, though cluttered with candles and dolls of every imaginable size, felt suddenly suffocating. The doll's eyes glimmered, reflecting candlelight like 1,000 tiny fires. Sophie could feel her cousin's gaze, cold, pleading, alive in a way that made her stomach twist into knots. Madison swallowed hard, breaking the tension. Okay, we have to find her. We have no choice. Jordan scoffed weakly, but there was no bravado behind his words. Yeah, great idea. Let's just wander around a room full of possessed kids and porcelain shells while the creator watches us. Perfect plan. Eric placed a firm hand on his shoulder. It's the only plan we've got. We do what the dollmaker said, find her, and maybe we can get out alive. The words settled into uneasy agreement. They split into two pairs, Madison and Eric taking the left side of the room, Sophie and Jordan the right. Every movement felt heavy, deliberate, as if the floor itself resisted their steps. The shadows cast by the flickering candlelight leapt and twisted on the walls. Every doll's eyes seemed to follow them, tracking even the smallest movement with unnerving precision. Sophie's pulse pounded so hard it hurt. She couldn't take her eyes off the doll at the far shelf, her cousin's braids catching every flicker of candlelight. She moved toward it cautiously, a hand trembling as she reached out, almost afraid to touch the delicate porcelain face. But as she stepped closer, something shifted. A doll on the bottom shelf, a boy with short, dark hair and an anxious expression, tilted its head toward her. Its glassy eyes glimmered in the dim light. Sophie froze, her breath catching in her throat. That was impossible. Dolls didn't move. But then it stepped forward. Not gracefully, not fluidly, but it stepped. A tiny foot lifted from the shelf, then another. It wasn't fast, but it was deliberate, and it didn't hesitate. It moved toward Sophie with uncanny awareness, tilting its head as if studying her every reaction. Did you see that? Sophie whispered, voice trembling. Jordan grabbed her arm, forcing her back. I saw it. Yes, I saw it. Let's not touch anything, okay? The doll stopped halfway across the floor and froze again, head cocked. Then it tilted it back, a tiny, whisper-like laugh escaping from somewhere deep in the porcelain chest. Sophie recoiled. Her stomach knotted. The sound, it wasn't like her cousin, not quite. But it carried the faintest echo of her voice, distorted and warped. The room seemed to contract. The other dolls on the shelves shifted in tandem, heads turning, limbs tilting ever so slightly, all of them fixated on the moving figure. Sophie realized with horror that every doll was aware. They weren't just watching, they were reacting. Madison's voice broke the spell. Sophie, move. We have to find her, now. Sophie tore her gaze away from the moving doll and approached her cousin's figure. The braids were perfect, the little scar above the eyebrow exactly as she remembered. But something about the eyes was different. They glimmered, alive and aware, as if recognizing Sophie and begging her silently to do something, anything. She knelt slowly in front of it. The doll's lips, so delicate, so impossibly human, seemed to part slightly. A whisper escaped, just audible enough for Sophie to catch. "Help me." Her heart leapt into her throat. I'm here. "I'll get you out," she said, voice cracking. But as she reached forward, her fingers trembling, the doll suddenly jerked backward violently, as though repelled by her touch. From the shadows, the dollmaker's voice slithered through the room. "They are patient, child. They respond to memory, to recognition. But they are mine. Every movement, every moment, every heartbeat, you intrude upon their eternity. And the sound of the words seemed to seep into the walls themselves, I am eternal." Sophie stumbled back. Her cousin's doll remained frozen, but the tiny whispers of movement persisted. The boy who had stepped forward earlier was now joined by another, a small girl, maybe 6 or 7, her eyes wide and fixed. They shuffled closer, limping slightly as if their porcelain legs carried the weight of real pain. Jordan cursed under his breath. "Oh, come on. This isn't happening. This isn't real." Madison grabbed him, shaking him roughly. "It is real, Jordan. Stop acting like this is some movie. We need to focus. We find her, we get out. We do not touch anything else." The room seemed to pulse, the air thickening with something invisible and oppressive. Sophie noticed for the first time that the candles themselves flickered irregularly, as if responding to the doll's movements. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the walls, sometimes coiling and twisting into shapes that resembled human forms, writhing silently behind the shelves. Eric spoke softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for the group to hear. "They're testing us. Every doll in this room, it's not random. It's like they're evaluating us. Seeing how far we'll go, how much fear we can endure." A sudden, soft thump echoed from behind the far wall. All 4 froze. Another thump, then another. They weren't alone upstairs. Something, or someone, was moving in the walls themselves, unseen. Sophie's eyes snapped to her cousin's doll again. This time, the glass eyes seemed to glisten with tears. She felt a pang of desperation so sharp it made her stomach twist. She had to get her out. She had to. But the dolls were not just passive toys, they were alive, aware, and obedient only to the dollmaker. The realization struck her like ice water: if they failed, even slightly, the consequences wouldn't just be death. It would be eternal. The dollmaker had promised survival only if they succeeded. Fail, and they would join the others, forever frozen in porcelain, another child added to his collection. Before anyone could react, the boy doll stepped forward again, and the other dolls followed, forming a loose, advancing circle around Sophie and her cousin. The air thickened. The whisper of hundreds of soft, distorted giggles and sighs filled the room. Madison grabbed Sophie's arm. "We need to move. Now. Find a way out. Don't get separated." Sophie nodded, trembling, and turned toward the shelves along the left wall, hoping against hope to find another clue, some object, some hidden door, anything that might guide them to freedom. The whispers grew louder, forming incoherent words that brushed against her mind like fingertips: stay, run, help, mine. And somewhere in the back of the room, Sophie felt it, the unmistakable heartbeat of her cousin. It was slow, soft, and deliberate, like a warning, a guide, and a plea all at once. Her chest tightened. She had to reach her. She had to reach her cousin before the dollmaker realized they were aware, before the dolls closed in completely. But as she took a tentative step forward, another shadow shifted at the edge of her vision, darker than the candlelight, stretching impossibly long. The dollmaker had moved, closer than she thought, watching every heartbeat, every tremor of fear. And then, with deliberate, horrifying slowness, the dollmaker spoke again. "Choose wisely, children. Or become part of my collection forever." Sophie's breath came in shallow, rapid gasps. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to flee the oppressive room filled with lifelike children trapped in porcelain shells. Yet, the advancing circle of dolls blocked her path. Their tiny, deliberate steps echoed against the wooden floorboards, a grotesque mimicry of life. Each one tilted its head, eyes glinting unnaturally, calculating every movement she made. It was as if the very air of the room had thickened, compressing her chest, slowing her thoughts. Madison grabbed her arm again, shaking her roughly. "We can't let them close in. We need to move together, now." Jordan swallowed hard, eyes darting from one advancing figure to another, noticing the subtle shifts in their posture. They weren't clumsy toys anymore. They had intention, coordination. Every tilt of a head, every shuffle forward, screamed awareness, and yet they made no noise except the faint patter of porcelain on wood. Eric whispered, voice trembling but deliberate, "They're testing us. Every doll is a trap, a distraction. If we panic, if we hesitate, we lose. Don't let them scare you. Focus on her, your cousin. That's our only chance." Sophie's gaze snapped to the doll with the chestnut braids. She could see her cousin's essence faintly shimmering beneath the polished surface. The whisper of recognition was almost tangible, a pulse that she felt as much as saw. The other dolls around them were drawn into some sort of synchrony, moving not toward her cousin but toward her. Their tiny, stiff legs carried them in a semicircle, closing the space with terrifying precision. Her hand reached out tentatively. Each step toward her cousin seemed to make the room constrict, the shadows thickening, candlelight flickering violently as if struggling against some invisible force. Then came the whispers, soft, distorted, overlapping voices that seemed to crawl along her skin. "Mine, stay, forever, help, mine." Madison grabbed Sophie's shoulder. "Don't touch anything else. Move slowly, carefully. Don't startle them. Don't let the dollmaker see fear in your eyes." The voice of the dollmaker slithered through the room, calm yet omnipresent. "They are patient, child. They feel your intent. Every heartbeat is mine. Every fear strengthens them. Every hesitation, every tremor in your soul. I see it all." Sophie's knees shook, but she forced herself to move closer to her cousin's doll. A single misstep, and the boy doll that had stepped forward earlier lunged, its movements fast and mechanical, but deliberate, designed to intimidate. Sophie stumbled backward, almost losing her balance, and the circle tightened with sinister synchronicity. "Stay focused," Eric muttered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He grabbed one of the advancing dolls by its tiny shoulder, lifting it slightly and letting it slide to the side. Its porcelain body was surprisingly heavy, unnaturally so, and it clattered to the floor with a hollow, echoing thud. Its head tilted back to the ceiling as if in silent protest, and then it slowly rose to its feet again, undeterred, as though nothing could stop it. Madison hissed, "They never give up." A soft, melodic giggle echoed through the shadows, high-pitched and warped. Sophie realized it was coming from a different section of the room, where the smallest dolls had begun crawling, not walking, moving with unnatural agility, converging on her cousin's figure. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't just a trap, it was a hunt. And she was the prey. Sophie's hand finally reached the chestnut-braided doll. The moment her fingers brushed the polished porcelain, a shock ran through her arm, cold and electric. The whisper that escaped the doll was urgent and fearful. "Quick, before he notices." Her heart thundered. She looked up to see the dollmaker now standing at the far corner of the room, unhurried, expression calm, yet every inch of him radiated menace. "Ah, you've discovered the key," he said softly, voice curling around their minds like smoke. "But beware, nothing comes without a price. You may reach her, but if your intent falters, if your will weakens, you will join them, and your soul will echo in porcelain for all eternity." Sophie's hand lingered over her cousin's doll, trembling. The whispers from the other dolls grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony. "Stay, mine, forever, do not leave." The boy doll, the first to move toward her, lunged again, faster this time. Sophie barely stepped back in time, nearly colliding with Jordan. But the circle was tightening relentlessly. Every step they took, every breath they drew, seemed to feed the dolls, making them more aggressive, more precise. Madison pulled at Sophie. "We have to, now. Move her to the door. That's the only way. We have to go before he realizes." The dollmaker's voice flowed through the room, calm and terrifying. "Move, hesitate, falter, and you will never leave. With every ounce of courage, Sophie lifted her cousin's doll. The second she did, the candlelight flared violently, shadows twisting into writhing forms along the walls. The other dolls recoiled for a split second, but then advanced more quickly, almost coordinating as though sensing the escape attempt. Eric and Madison created a path, pushing and guiding the advancing dolls aside. Jordan, terrified, shouted, "Faster! We're running out of time." The dolls shrieked. No, they didn't shriek in sound, but the atmosphere itself seemed to scream, a psychic wail that pressed against their minds. Sophie felt as though invisible hands were trying to pull her back, trying to drag her cousin's essence into the ether where the dollmaker could claim her fully. Sophie's heart nearly stopped. Her fingers ached from gripping the porcelain, but she couldn't let go. The candlelight flickered violently, shadows forming grotesque, humanoid shapes that lunged, twisted, and recoiled, a living nightmare materializing from every corner of the room. And then, just as the first step toward the stairwell seemed within reach, a soft, chilling voice whispered directly into Sophie's mind. "You cannot leave, not yet." Her stomach sank. The dollmaker was not just watching. He was inside her head. The oppressive weight of the room pressed against Sophie's chest like a physical force. The dolls moved in silent, synchronized steps, advancing steadily, their unblinking eyes fixed on her and the doll she clutched. Every candle flickered violently, casting grotesque, twisting shadows along the walls, and the whispers of 100 trapped voices clawed at her mind. Sophie's fingers ached, holding tight to her cousin's porcelain form. She could feel a faint warmth emanating from it, impossible, unnatural, but it reminded her that this wasn't just a doll. It was her cousin, trapped in a shell, alive in a way the world outside would never understand. "Keep moving!" Eric shouted, shoving aside a pair of small dolls that lunged forward. His hands trembled, but he didn't falter. Madison followed, her own resolve hardening despite the terror curling in her stomach. Jordan trailed behind, eyes wide, a mix of panic and disbelief on his face. But then it happened. Sophie noticed it first, a shimmer in the air, subtle, almost invisible, like heat waves rising off the floor. The air around Jordan seemed to warp, as if bending toward some invisible point. His skin rippled unnaturally for a heartbeat, and then, with a soundless shift, he was gone. The world seemed to lurch. Sophie screamed, dropping her cousin's doll for a second in shock, though she managed to grab it before it fell. "Jordan," she shouted, voice cracking. Eric and Madison spun around, eyes wide, searching the empty space where Jordan had been. The hallway behind them remained intact, the staircase still leading upward, but there was no trace of him, no sound, no movement, nothing. Only silence, heavier than the air around them before. The dolls shifted. Every one of them turned toward the space Jordan had occupied, heads tilting, glassy eyes glinting as if they had claimed him even before his disappearance. Their tiny feet shuffled in unison, a slow, deliberate advance, and Sophie realized with dawning horror, the dollmaker did not need to touch them. His power extended through the dolls themselves, reaching beyond porcelain into reality, capable of snatching someone whole. Sophie's hands shook violently as she gripped her cousin's doll again. He's gone. Eric shook his head. "We can't think like that. We need to keep moving. That's exactly what he wants. Fear, hesitation, it feeds him." Madison swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "But, how? How does he do that? We just saw it happen." Sophie's gaze darted around the room, taking in the dozens of lifelike dolls. Their eyes seemed almost smug, as though aware of the dollmaker's reach. Even the smallest dolls, those crawling across shelves or shifting slightly from the floor, seemed to radiate power, a silent warning of the stakes. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a cacophony of distorted voices. Sophie recognized fragments, her cousin's voice, Jordan's panicked breathing, others she couldn't identify, all meshed together. "Stay, mine, forever, help, mine." Sophie's stomach twisted as realization sank in. The dollmaker's power didn't just trap the children, it trapped anyone who entered, anyone who dared interfere. Each friend was now a potential addition to his collection. Madison grabbed her shoulder, shaking her roughly. "We have to move faster. We can't let him do it to any of us." Sophie nodded, swallowing back the bile rising in her throat. She clutched the doll tighter, moving cautiously but urgently toward the staircase. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each creak announcing their presence to the dollmaker and the dozens of dolls that now seemed to coordinate in perfect unison. A small girl doll, one of the crawling ones, lunged from the corner. Sophie dodged instinctively, but the doll clambered onto the stairs ahead, blocking her path with unnatural agility. Madison kicked it aside, but as it fell, it slowly rose, climbing toward them again, eyes unblinking, as if nothing could truly stop it. Eric grabbed Sophie's arm. "We need a plan. Just moving blindly will get us all killed." Sophie's mind raced. She could feel the faint pulse of her cousin's essence within the doll, almost like a heartbeat, guiding her. But the dollmaker's presence pressed against her mind, subtle yet unrelenting, whispering doubts and fears. "You can't save them. You'll fail. They're mine." Her resolve hardened. No matter what, she would reach her cousin. She would not let the dollmaker claim her, and she would not let Jordan disappear completely. But then, another shimmer appeared, this time around Madison. Sophie screamed, lunging forward, but it was too late. Madison's body quivered, rippling in the same unnatural way that had claimed Jordan. Before Sophie could reach her, Madison vanished. Sophie staggered back, clutching her cousin's doll tightly. Eric grabbed her shoulders, eyes wide with terror. "We're next if we hesitate. We have to move now." The room seemed to respond to their urgency. The dolls shifted more violently, their tiny bodies darting forward, blocking potential escape routes. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, forming humanoid shapes that lunged and recoiled with terrifying unpredictability. The whispers had escalated into overlapping voices, a chorus of lost children, each one clawing at their minds with invisible fingers. Sophie's chest tightened as she realized the truth. The dollmaker didn't just make dolls. He made prisons. And every second they delayed, every moment of fear, was feeding his power, extending the reach of the shop itself. Eric grabbed her hand. "Come on. We move together. No hesitation." With every ounce of courage, Sophie moved, stepping toward the stairwell while keeping her cousin's doll close. Behind them, the dolls advanced, relentless, as if they could sense the flickering fear in every heartbeat. Each step forward was a battle against the dollmaker's influence, a test of willpower as much as agility. And then, from the far corner of the room, the dollmaker's voice, calm and omnipotent, slithered directly into their minds. "You can run, but you cannot hide. They are mine. And soon, so will you be." Sophie's chest tightened. She clutched her cousin's doll like a lifeline, her mind screaming that they couldn't stop, that hesitation meant disappearance, that fear was a luxury they could not afford. As they reached the staircase, the dolls shifted one final time, forming a wall between them and the door. And in that moment, Sophie understood something chilling. The dollmaker didn't just control the dolls. He controlled the rules of the room itself. Every movement, every breath, every decision would now be under his invisible thumb. And as the staircase loomed before them, dark and foreboding, Sophie realized the fight for survival had only just begun. The staircase loomed ahead like a blackened throat, each step warped with age, groaning under the weight of time. Sophie's knuckles whitened around her cousin's doll as she and Eric pressed forward, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding so loud they seemed to drown out the whispers of the dolls below. But the silence that followed Jordan's and Madison's vanishings was worse than the whispers, emptier, hungrier, like the house itself had fed. Eric reached the first step, glancing back at the wall of dolls forming behind them. Their eyes glimmered in the candlelight, unblinking, unwavering, almost triumphant. "Move," he said hoarsely, shoving Sophie up the stairs before him. His voice cracked, not from weakness but from the weight of knowing they were now only two. The climb was agonizing. Each step stretched, as though the staircase lengthened under their feet, dragging them into a slow ascent. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying with it the faint scent of varnish and rot. Sophie's cousin's doll grew heavier in her arms with every step, yet the pulse inside it grew stronger, insistent, as if urging her upward. Halfway up, the whispers returned. Not from below this time, but from inside the walls themselves. They were faint, childlike voices, their tones broken with static. Sophie froze, pressing her ear to the splintering wood. "Help me. It hurts. Don't leave us." Her stomach twisted violently. The voices weren't echoes. They were cries, pleas, muffled by layers of plaster and wood, as if dozens of small throats had been sealed within the walls themselves. Eric grabbed her wrist, pulling her away. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Don't listen. That's what he wants. He's trying to." But Sophie shook her head, her voice sharp. "No. They're real. They're trapped. I can hear them, Eric. They're in the walls." The dollmaker's voice seeped from above, calm and mocking, curling through the wood and into their skulls. "Perceptive child. They are all around you, voices you cannot unhear, lives you cannot undo. They are patient. They have no choice but to wait. But you still have choices to make." Eric pushed her forward. "Ignore him. Keep moving." At the top of the stairs, the landing stretched into a long, narrow hallway. The floor sagged underfoot, and the wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips. A row of doors lined either side, all closed, their knobs tarnished and rusted. Each door seemed to hum faintly, the air vibrating as though something pressed against them from the other side. Sophie's cousin's doll stirred in her arms, the porcelain lips parting slightly, enough to whisper one desperate word, "Left." Her blood ran cold. She jerked her head toward Eric. "Did you hear that?" Eric shook his head, his face pale. "Hear what?" "The doll. She spoke. She said left." Sophie's voice trembled, but conviction burned beneath it. Eric's jaw clenched, torn between disbelief and the terror of trusting what might have been a trick. But when he saw the raw determination in Sophie's eyes, he nodded. "Then we go left." They approached the first door on the left. The humming intensified, a deep vibration that rattled the hinges. Sophie's hands shook as she reached for the knob, but Eric stopped her, placing his hand firmly over hers. "Let me," he said. The knob resisted at first, cold as ice, but then turned with a sudden snap, and the door creaked open. A gust of air rushed out, thick, damp, and fetid, carrying the unmistakable stench of mildew and something fouler, like spoiled meat. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb that hung from the ceiling. Dolls lined every wall, floor to ceiling, stacked in crooked shelves that threatened to collapse under their weight. But these dolls were different. They weren't pristine. Their porcelain faces were cracked, their eyes missing, their mouths frozen in grotesque, silent screams. Some were dismembered, limbs piled in corners, as though discarded experiments. Sophie gagged, clutching her cousin's doll tighter. The whispers in the walls swelled, overlapping, desperate, "Don't let him, too late, forever." Eric stepped further inside, his face grim. "This is where he disposes of them." Sophie's chest tightened, rage and horror boiling inside her. "No. This is where he hides his failures." The dollmaker's voice rippled through the room, deeper now, resonant. "Not failures, child. Lessons. Each one taught me something. Each one brought me closer to perfection." Suddenly, the bulb flickered violently, and every cracked doll's head snapped toward them in unison, their hollow sockets burning with faint, ghostly light. The air vibrated, the shelves shaking violently as though the room itself was waking up. Eric lunged, slamming the door shut just as the shelves began to collapse inward, a cacophony of porcelain shattering filling the hallway. The vibrations didn't stop, they only intensified, spreading through the floorboards beneath their feet. Sophie stumbled back, clutching the doll, her ears ringing from the cries of the broken children. "He's not just keeping them here. He's feeding on them. Every one of them. That's how he's so strong." Eric's face hardened. Then we cut him off. We starve him. We break whatever keeps him connected to them. But before Sophie could respond, another shimmer rippled at the far end of the hallway. Her breath hitched. She knew what it meant. Someone else was about to vanish. Eric, she whispered, her voice breaking. The shimmer grew closer, the air warping unnaturally. Sophie's pulse thundered in her ears. She reached for him instinctively, but his form rippled like water disturbed by a stone. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in defiance. "Don't let him win," Eric said, his voice steady, before his body folded into nothingness, vanishing before her eyes. Sophie screamed, the sound echoing down the hallway, swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. Now she was alone. The dollmaker's voice purred, soft and venomous. "Bravery is wasted on the doomed. One by one, they all become mine. And soon, so will you." The doll in her arms pulsed again, faint but insistent, whispering directly into her mind, "Don't stop. Don't trust him. Find me before it's too late." Sophie staggered forward, her eyes burning with tears and fury. She had lost Jordan. She had lost Madison. She had lost Eric. But she would not lose her cousin. She would not let the dollmaker have her. Not without a fight. The silence after Eric's disappearance was unbearable. It was not the silence of an empty house, but the silence of a predator pausing, savoring the fear of its prey before striking again. Sophie's sobs were swallowed instantly, muffled by the oppressive air, as though the walls themselves conspired to quiet her grief. The doll in her arms pressed against her chest with a rhythmic pulse, faint and weak, but it was enough to remind her that her cousin's spirit was still somewhere in this labyrinth of horrors, waiting to be saved. She wiped her tears with trembling hands and steadied her breathing, forcing herself forward. To falter now would mean not just her death, but her cousin's soul condemned to an eternity of porcelain silence. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, each step echoing as if she were walking inside a cavern rather than a corridor. The wallpaper had rotted away in patches, revealing wooden boards beneath, etched with symbols she didn't recognize, spirals, jagged lines, and distorted childlike drawings carved directly into the walls. Some resembled stick figures with missing heads, others were nothing more than crude dolls sketched in frantic repetition. Sophie traced her fingers over one of the carvings, her skin prickling with dread. It felt warm, pulsing faintly, as though the wall itself were alive. She jerked her hand back, bile rising in her throat. The dollmaker's voice followed her like a shadow, low and almost coaxing now. "You've seen what I've built, child. Do you know why they scream? It is not pain alone. It is memory. Memories make them strong. Memories make them mine. Each child, each doll, is a story I preserve, perfected forever." Sophie clenched her jaw, refusing to respond. She would not give him the satisfaction of hearing her voice crack with fear. Yet his words dug into her mind, planting seeds of horror she could not shake. Memories. He wasn't just trapping their souls, he was feeding on their lives, their laughter, their identities, consuming them until only hollow fragments remained. The hallway ended at a single door, larger than the rest, its frame blackened with soot, its surface scarred with deep claw marks as though someone, or something, had tried to claw their way out. The knob was unlike the others, it was fashioned from ivory, carved into the shape of a doll's head. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth stretched open in a silent scream. Sophie's hands trembled as she reached for it, but the doll in her arms pulsed again, stronger this time, as though urging her onward. She swallowed her fear and twisted the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber lit by dozens of flickering lamps, their flames casting long, jittering shadows across the room. It was colder here, the air damp with the acrid scent of chemicals, formaldehyde, varnish, and something sickly sweet beneath it, like rotting fruit. Wooden workbenches lined the chamber, each cluttered with tools, scalpels dulled with rust, jars filled with cloudy liquid, sewing needles threaded with red string that looked too much like veins. Along the walls hung half-finished dolls, their bodies suspended by hooks, their faces blank, awaiting detail. Some bore patches of human hair, others still had fragments of clothing stitched onto them, ribbons, buttons, scraps that Sophie recognized with a jolt of nausea as pieces of children's garments. At the center of the room stood an enormous table, carved from heavy oak, its surface scarred with decades of cuts and stains. On it lay an open book, its pages yellowed and brittle, covered in tight, slanted handwriting. Sophie approached cautiously, her breath fogging in the frigid air, and leaned over the book. What she saw made her heart lurch violently. The pages were filled with drawings, anatomical sketches of children's bodies beside diagrams of dolls. Arrows connected organs to porcelain molds, bones to frameworks, veins to red threads. Each drawing was accompanied by chilling notes: soul transfusion requires vessel intact, memory retention unstable and cracked porcelain, child's essence binds best when blood is fresh. Sophie's hands shook as she turned the pages faster, each entry worse than the last. Names were scrawled in the margins, dates, ages, small details of each child. Madison, age 11, resisted longer than expected. Still weeping. Jordan, age 13, voice captured. Face shattered. And then, to her horror, her cousin's name. Her vision blurred with tears as she read the entry: Clara, age 9, soul strong, suitable vessel. Still resisting. Must complete process before night is over. Sophie's breath hitched violently. Clara. Her cousin wasn't gone, not yet. The dollmaker hadn't finished binding her. There was still time. The dollmaker's voice coiled through the chamber, deeper now, almost intimate, as if he were standing directly behind her. You understand now, don't you? Flesh decays. Bone rots. But porcelain endures. I preserve them, perfect them. They live on, untouched by the cruelty of time. They should thank me, and so should you, for soon, you too will never be forgotten. Sophie whirled around, clutching the doll protectively, but the chamber was empty. Only shadows shifted, stretching unnaturally long across the walls. Yet she could feel him, pressing in from every side, his presence thick and suffocating. Her pulse thundered as she backed toward the table, her eyes darting to the shelves along the far wall. There, behind a row of glass jars, sat a small porcelain mask, cracked down the middle, its surface stained with something dark. Beneath it lay a pile of bones no larger than twigs, bound together with red thread. Sophie's stomach dropped. These weren't just dolls. These were graves. Each porcelain vessel had been constructed over the remains of the very children it trapped. The doll in her arms trembled violently, its porcelain lips moving again, whispering in a voice barely audible, "Don't let him finish me, break the vessel, free us." Sophie's chest burned with fury. For the first time, her fear was eclipsed by rage, hot and blinding. She wasn't just here to save Clara. She was here to end this, end him. But before she could move, the lamps flickered wildly, plunging the room into darkness. When the flames sputtered back to life, Sophie's blood froze. The dollmaker was standing across the table, his form tall and gaunt, his face hidden behind a porcelain mask painted with a grotesque smile. His eyes gleamed through the hollow sockets, cold and unblinking, fixed entirely on her. And in his hand, he held a freshly crafted doll, unfinished, but unmistakable. The clothing stitched onto it belonged to Clara. For a long moment, Sophie could not breathe. The dollmaker stood across the table, a grotesque silhouette cut from shadow and firelight, the porcelain mask clinging to his face as though it had fused to bone. His elongated fingers caressed the unfinished doll in his grasp, Clara's doll. Sophie's stomach nodded with a sickening certainty. Every stitch, every thread had been pulled from the essence of her cousin. The little scraps of fabric sewn into its chest were remnants of Clara's favorite dress, the one she had worn the summer before when they had picnicked by the lake. It was not a toy in his hand, it was her cousin's soul, her cousin's body, being whittled down into silence. "You don't understand," the dollmaker said softly, tilting his head as though studying her. His voice was gentle, almost fatherly, but it reverberated with a darkness that scraped the air raw. "You think me cruel. But I do not kill children. I save them. I take what the world discards and I preserve it. Parents forget. Time erases. The world devours the innocence of youth. But me? He raised the doll higher, cradling it as one might cradle a newborn. I grant them permanence. They never grow old. They never suffer. They remain forever pure, forever mine. Sophie's chest heaved with fury, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. You're a monster, she spat, her voice shaking but strong. You don't save them, you trap them. You take everything they are and lock them inside a cage they can't escape. They're screaming, they're begging, you can't pretend you don't hear them. The dollmaker's mask glinted in the firelight, the painted smile warped into mockery. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until the distance between them was suffocating. The unfinished doll twitched faintly in his hands, its porcelain fingers curling as though alive. Sophie's arms tightened around the doll she carried, her cousin's voice vessel, feeling its pulse quicken like a panicked heartbeat. Ah, the dollmaker whispered, his tone shifting, almost reverent. You hear them too. You feel them. That means you are not like the others. You could join them, join me. Together, we could perfect the craft. We could build a family that never fades. The words slithered through Sophie's mind like poison, tempting in their twisted promise. For a terrifying instant, she imagined it, Clara preserved, her laughter never fading, her small body never succumbing to illness or time. Sophie herself, frozen in youth, spared the agony of aging, of loss. An eternal family of porcelain, untouched by the decay of the real world. But then she remembered Eric's scream as he vanished, remembered the hollow cries of children echoing through the halls, remembered the unbearable loneliness of the doll's whispered pleas. No eternity was worth that kind of silence. No preservation was worth being stripped of choice, of freedom, of the messy, fleeting beauty of life. Her grip on the doll tightened, and through her tears, a new fire sparked within her chest. No, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. I won't let you take her. I won't let you take anyone else. The dollmaker tilted his head, and for the first time, his voice wavered, betraying a flicker of anger. Then you will watch her die. And when her soul fractures, you will beg me to restore her. With a sudden, violent motion, he slammed the unfinished doll onto the oak table, lifting a long, rusted needle from his workbench. The red thread dangling from its eye glistened like wet veins. Sophie's heart lurched. If he bound the final stitch, Clara would be gone, trapped forever in porcelain silence. Acting on instinct, Sophie darted forward, clutching the doll in her arms, the one that had whispered to her all along. It vibrated violently, as though it understood the stakes, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. Without hesitation, she raised it high above her head and smashed it against the edge of the oak table. The crack was deafening. Porcelain shards exploded across the room, scattering like glass. For a split second, the dollmaker froze, his mask tilting upward as though he, too, had felt something rupture deep inside. The air itself seemed to shatter, filled with a chorus of screams, agonized, desperate, and then suddenly freed. The walls trembled, the shelves rattled, the dolls hanging from hooks thrashed wildly as if possessed. No, the dollmaker roared, his voice breaking from its calm facade into something monstrous. Do you know what you've done? Sophie staggered back, shielding her face as a whirlwind of voices erupted around her. The freed soul, whoever it had been, joined the others, their cries blending into a torrent that shook the very foundations of the house. The lamps blew out, plunging the chamber into flickering darkness. And then she saw it. The mask on the dollmaker's face cracked, a thin fracture slicing down from the hollow eye socket to the grotesque painted grin. Black smoke leaked from the fissure, curling like tendrils into the air. He clutched his face with one elongated hand, staggering backward, his composure unraveling. You think this ends me, he hissed, his voice distorted, echoing with many voices at once, the voices of children, of men, of women, of countless victims entwined within him. You have freed one, but there are hundreds more. I am eternal. I am not the maker. I am the pact. The words struck Sophie with a chilling clarity. He was not a man. Not entirely. He was something older, something bound to the dolls through blood and ritual. A parasite feeding on innocence, weaving souls into porcelain not out of cruelty alone, but because that was his essence. He could not exist without them. The unfinished doll on the table twitched again, and Sophie's gaze locked onto it, Clara's vessel. Her cousin's face was faintly visible beneath the glaze, her tiny lips moving in a silent plea. Time slowed, her pulse thundering in her ears. This was her only chance. With a scream that tore her throat raw, Sophie lunged for the doll. The dollmaker moved too, his shadow stretching unnaturally across the walls, claws reaching for her. She grabbed the porcelain figure and, with every ounce of strength she had left, hurled it against the floor. The doll shattered, splintering into 1,000 pieces. For a heartbeat, silence. And then, light. Blinding, searing light that erupted from the shards, filling the chamber with a radiance that was not of this world. The cries of the children swelled into laughter, pure and echoing, as one by one, the dolls hanging from the walls dissolved into dust, their spirits freed at last. The black smoke pouring from the dollmaker's mask screamed in agony, twisting violently before bursting apart into nothingness. His body crumbled like dry clay, collapsing into a pile of shattered porcelain and ash. Sophie collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, the remains of Clara's vessel scattered before her. She feared she had destroyed her cousin entirely. But then, from the cloud of shimmering dust, she heard it, a small, trembling voice. "Sophie?" She looked up through blurred vision, and there she was, Clara. Pale, trembling, but alive. Flesh and blood. Tears streamed down Sophie's face as she pulled her cousin into her arms, clutching her tightly as though she would never let go again. The house groaned around them, its walls splitting, its beams collapsing as though the destruction of the dollmaker had unbound its cursed foundations. Sophie half-dragged, half-carried Clara through the crumbling corridors, past rows of collapsing shelves and falling debris. The whispers of the freed children followed them, not as cries this time, but as faint, grateful murmurs. They burst through the front doors just as the building gave way behind them, the abandoned toy shop imploding into itself with a roar, consumed by fire and shadow. The night air was sharp and cold, the stars above shockingly bright after the suffocating darkness within. Sophie fell to the grass outside, clutching Clara close, both of them gasping, weeping, trembling with the enormity of what they had survived. But as the last echo of the dollmaker's voice faded into the night, Sophie could not help but wonder. His words lingered in her mind, festering with unease. "I am not the maker. I am the pact." Had she truly destroyed him, or merely shattered his vessel, as she had shattered so many others? Was the pact broken, or had she only delayed its hunger? Behind her, in the rubble of the toy shop, something faint glimmered among the ashes, a shard of porcelain, cracked but still intact, its hollow painted eyes staring upward into the night.